Welcome everyone to our latest SEGRA webinar. It's great to have you all on board. My name is Kate Charters. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of the National Steering Committee for Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia, SEGRA for short. SEGRA is recognised as Australia's most credible independent voice on issues affecting regional, rural and remote Australia. It's a critical forum to ensure the voice of those who live and work in regional Australia is heard. And each year we put out a communique about what the key issues are that are facing regional, rural and remote Australia. These can of course be found on our website, www.segra.com.au. We started this series of webinars in response to COVID-19 and how that in particular affected regional, rural and remote Australia, a combination of information gathering and also resource sharing. Because of the nature of the webinar, it's not possible for us to have live Q&A, but there's a Q&A and a chat box down the bottom, and you'd be very welcome to put your questions there, and we'll do our best to get to them throughout the webinar. I'd also like to recognise Robert Prestipino, who's co-facilitating each of these webinars, and he's the principal of Vital Places. And Robert has particular expertise in design thinking and in place-based investable business cases. And has been doing some work in Quilpie, Geelong and various other places. So good to have you on board, Robert. Thanks. It's a great pleasure to welcome Kerry today. Kerry was in fact the inaugural challenge winner at SEGRA in 2013, and Kerry challenged us all to look at how we could, what matters in communities and what we're going to do about it, and undertook a very interesting project around engaging community on what matters to them. So that was, I think, in 2013, Kerry. So good to have you here today. Kerry is a passionate advocate for regional Australian communities and is currently the Director of Regional Development for Regional Development Australia in the Mid-North Coast. Kerry is also the CEO of Evolve Group Network, which she established in 2004. Kerry's work focuses on empowering everyday regional leaders to build sustainable communities. With a strong consultancy background, she has worked with all levels of government, not-for-profits and Aboriginal corporations. She is often called upon for her facilitation skills to moderate pathways forward for contentious and complex issues. Kerry has tertiary qualifications in marketing, tourism, and additional qualifications in life coaching and adult education. So welcome, Kerry. It's great to have someone with such a long-term passion and understanding, I suppose, of regional communities. It's great to have you here. Today, I've asked Kerry to talk about a youth employment project that she's been involved in for a number of years, and it's a delight to have you here to talk to us today. And I understand you're beaming in from the Hydro Majestic.
I am, lucky me. We'll keep our fingers crossed with internet connection.
Well, lovely to welcome you, and over to you, Kerry.
Oh, thanks so much, Kate. And you're such a champion of people in regional Australia as well, and have certainly championed a lot of my different projects. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Now, before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians from the nations, wherever it is that you're located today. I'm usually based in Gumbaynggirr country in the mid-north coast, but as Kate just mentioned today, I'm in the Blue Mountains. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Is that all? Thumbs up? Yeah, excellent. That's good. So today I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown of a project which was called Youth Pathways, and I'll explain where that's gone to from here. what this project did was it drew upon work that I had done through Evolve over almost a 20-year period in the employment services. I'd rather say employment services than unemployment services. I think positive language is a good place to start. So let's get into it. Just go to the next slide. Okay. So within Regional Development Australia Mid-North Coast, there's a list of projects that we worked on that I guess really evolved, and of course that's my company name, but it's a word that means a lot to me, because I think when we work in communities, what we really need to do is grow upon our work. I'm doing a separate body of work at the moment around a theory that I call spiralling up, and I think too often in our communities we forget what happened, because if we learn from our history whether things did work or didn't work, we can actually grow and build upon them, or spiral up and remain resilient. I think that was a different project we did with SEGRA at one point too, Kate. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit of an insight into these projects, and you can get more information about any of them on the Regional Development Australia Mid-North Coast site. So that's all there for you to look at. So in 2017, we started by doing a skills audit of our region. And what we really hoped to discover in that was information about supply and demand of skills. So we had a great response from employers in the region about what skills were in demand. And while a lot of it didn't surprise us, of course we need tradies, of course we need hospitality and aged care staff, we did find things like management skills are really in short supply in our region, and yet there wasn't a lot of management training available. Now, this project really got us thinking about what does the composition of our workforce and our businesses look like, and what are the specific skill sets that they are looking for. And we learned very clearly at that point that businesses aren't necessarily looking for full skill sets, full qualifications. They're more likely to be looking for those individual skills that they need to plug in at that point in time. We also learned through that skills audit project that employers are much more likely to train their employees on the job than look for accredited training. Now, of course, this is different if somebody wants to be a nurse or requires that qualification for a particular reason in their job. But generally speaking, employers are looking for people with good old-fashioned nous. They want to know they can turn up on time, they want to know they'll treat their customers appropriately, and they want to know they'll come dressed for the job. And that's basically what they're looking for. Now, there aren't a lot of opportunities, despite what programs may exist in the workplace, that can truly skill people in these areas if that's not what we might call common sense to them. The next project that we went on to, and I'll just give you a quick look at that one, is industry blueprints. Now, we knew that we would need a set of tools if we wanted to attract particularly young people into industries that may be not quite as attractive for them. So we worked on 4 different industries: aged care, tourism. We also looked at trades, and again, these maps are on our website. So we wanted to create something, and we did produce these as posters as well, so that careers advisors could essentially use these. Now, you can imagine where young people's eyes went to immediately, and we tested this many times. How much can I earn? What's the salary? So these posters became a really useful education tool for careers advisors to be able to give young people a snapshot, not only about jobs. So we have this language in Australia about jobs, and I honestly don't believe the future of work is about jobs. If you listen to, there's an interview I recently heard with a woman called Josie Gibson, who has some really interesting things to say about rethinking the workforce, and similarly with the Foundation for Young Australians. Our future is not in the jobs that we know today. Our future is in looking at what skills we have and putting them together in the ways that will create the jobs of the future. If you go through ANSCO codes, for example, you'll notice drone operator is something that doesn't exist. So our jobs, or our job titles, are being created at a rate that we just can't keep up with. And that's why I think we need to have a good conversation about skills. So that's what these posters also enable careers teachers to start to do. Nevertheless, at the same time, we worked with one high school, Maxwell High School, and delivered the Foundation for Young Australians $20 Boss program. Now, for me, that was really important because my business training actually started when I was 16 with the Young Achievers program, and I never forgot that skill set that I learned through that program. So the $20 Boss operates in a similar way, only people actually get $20 startup capital to be able to start up their businesses. And there were some great businesses that were set up within that program. So that also gave me a bit of a clue about youth entrepreneurship. And we weren't really seeing at that point a lot of programs that were designed to stimulate youth entrepreneurship in the regions. I know that there are some great ones, but there's a lot more we can do in that area, particularly when we can really articulate the skills, again, that are required to run a business. Then Blueprint for Youth Pathways was quite a big project that we ran. That project received some funding from the state government, and with that we were able to develop the prototype of what became My Future Workforce. So we really dug into, at this point, the fact that the whole ecosystem, looking after the way that young people, and in fact all people, are employed, it doesn't glue together in a way that can create comprehensive pathways. And when people are fourth generation unemployed, and a lot of them are in my region, if you don't have your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents to give you guidance into careers, you really need to rely on the service system. And if the service system lets you down, or you don't know how to navigate through it, you will probably find it difficult to find a pathway. So I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. The Youth Pathways project I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide, but just to continue on, we then started doing some work with Regional Development Australia in the Northern Rivers, because the New South Wales government recognises the North Coast as both of our RDA regions put together. So Tim and I together developed the Skills Snapshot, which built upon the skills audit. And interestingly, it gave us a set of data that was quite similar to our skills audit. They were still lacking management skills. Only 4% of employers were going to job services when they needed an employee. Employers were still preferring to train their staff within their own workplace. The North Coast Employment Strategy is something that Tim and I worked on this year, and that strategy is something that we're very proud of. It really looks at, and I will explain that a bit more in a minute. And Ready, Set, Go is a really quite a simple project that we're delivering in our region in the Mid-North Coast, and it uses music industry skills to develop employability skills among young people. So that program's currently running, and I'll explain how that all fits in with the broader campaign. So Blueprint for Youth Pathways, when we actually developed the overriding system and started to understand the ecosystem, we knew that a digital solution alone would never be enough to solve the problem of youth unemployment or employment, whichever way you want to look at it. At that point in time, there were actually 22.3% youth unemployment in our region. And we noticed some things like there were 6 different task forces working on that in that region, and they weren't necessarily talking to each other. We noticed that careers teachers were overworked and often didn't have the resources they needed to get young people into jobs. And a lot of careers teachers that we spoke to didn't have the ability to get outside of the school and to even meet employers. So when they don't have the opportunity to do that, how do they know what is relevant in the region? How do they know where to send young people for their roles? So we really realised that certainly as a Regional Development Australia entity, we had a role in connecting all of these pieces together, because somebody has to be the glue, and if nobody is that playing that role, young people will continue to suffer. So we did deliver that project. We piloted it over a 6-month period. It had some great results. It ended up creating 10 jobs for young people. But more importantly, we were really able to have a dialogue about that linking that is required to be able to create long-term pathways. Now, here's a few other things that we learned. We learned during that process that employers have service fatigue. We learned that they were sick of entities knocking on their door and making promises for programs that didn't always suit their needs. We learned that employers didn't really care about wage incentives and often found that the paperwork was overrode any kind of benefit they saw to their business. Now, this was really gobsmacking for us to learn that 0.01% of businesses in our region employed over 20 people. Now, 60% of businesses in my region in the Mid-North Coast do not employ anybody. So when we're looking for these really big bang, let's get all of the jobs that we possibly can, or let's, where are we going to send young people? We knew that we really needed to drill down into the industries that can actually create employment and do have job opportunities. We knew that we needed to have a conversation about young people maybe leaving the region so they can get skills. And we also knew, and this is a gap that is still yet to be filled, that there's programs that are required. There's a lot of funding and incentives for businesses to start up, but what happens when they get to the valley of death at 4 years? Because that is when they become a business, or might become a business that can employ people, or go broke. We learned that businesses are often busy doing business, so they don't have time to mess around with traineeships. They don't have time to mess around with programs. They just want to do their business because that's what they're there for. There was a lack of support in sustaining employment. Now, it's important for me to add at this point that I've actually only been in a job myself for 4 years, so my natural habitat is being self-employed. Now, I've employed 2 school-based trainees myself, and I know that there was a lot of support promised and I didn't see it. And that constantly upset me as an employer, because I had these great kids that were really keen, but I was a quintessential, didn't employ anybody at the time, and I didn't have the time to give them the extra support that they really needed. So thankfully they did get through. Thankfully we did get help in the end, but it really takes dedicated human beings, because the system isn't necessarily designed to work. We noticed also that there was lacking support, as I mentioned, to grow the businesses, to create employment, and that the ecosystem was just messy. Now, I will explain that a bit more. I've had 2 decades to get my head around this messy ecosystem. I will try and simplify it so you can see what it looks like. So, sorry, did I just miss something? No, I didn't. Okay, so from the employee perspective, we learned that recruitment processes can actually be quite confusing. Now, I actually have 3 teenagers myself, and they can't understand why it's different to apply for a job at McDonald's as a Woolworths, and how do you do that, and why do you go and drop your resume into a local shop, and why are all of these things different? Now, I can explain that to my kids and I can help them through the process. Interesting note there, I made them do it themselves, because I actually think that's a really important part of their future employability skills. But again, if somebody's 4th generation unemployed, how are they going to get that support? I don't understand why this isn't part of the school curriculum, because young people really need the support in doing how to apply for a job, how to get a tax file number. All of these things should be part of the school curriculum, I think. We also learned, and I find this heartbreaking myself, over-certification among job seekers is something that you'll see in any community that you go to. Now, I've had job seekers tell me that they could wallpaper their walls with qualifications, but it doesn't add up to a job still. Unfortunately, a lot of job seekers find themselves recycled. So I've personally met a lot that have certificate 2 or 3 might be in aged care, might be hospitality, might be disability services, but again, that next step just isn't happening. So with careers advisors, having limited linkages to industry is of course a challenge. There's so much that we can do to support careers advisors, and I'd love to see that happening. The support isn't always linked to a pathway for a person. I can honestly tell you, I've run or facilitated 7 Work for the Dole projects, and I've worked with a lot of people who are long-term unemployed. I've never met anybody that doesn't want a job. Now, I know that there's that quintessential belief in Australia, the dole bludger. I don't really think that person exists. I think if we thought about employment in different ways, we'd find that they are quite happy to contribute meaningfully to the community, but maybe it's not in a way that we traditionally recognise. that was a bit of a segue. We also found that young people are being prepared for careers that may not actually exist in the future. And if you're a parent or if you're working with young people now, you really need to be mindful of this, because our workforce is changing at a it's changing so quickly. We really need to make sure that young people are resilient and flexible enough to be able to change. I mean, who would have thought that most of us will be working from home now? Who would have thought that it was fine to run a webinar from wherever it is that you're in the state or the country or wherever it is? Our workforce is changing from the way that it's structured to the way that we pivot from job to job to the expectations that we have in the workforce. And we do need people to be resilient around that, particularly young people. When I say transition gaps, what I've found is that there are certain life stages that people get to, and this is where they can really easily fall through the cracks. So that might be can't stand school, going to leave. Okay, there's a gap there. That might be finished HSC, what do I do now? There's a gap there. It might be just finished my first job, don't know what to do, coming back to work after having a baby, raising family, moving to a new community, whatever it is. We need to get better at looking at the transition gaps and taking people along into the next step. And when I talk about pathway and the importance of pathways, I don't think people need to know that they want to be a fireman or an economist or whatever it is in the future. What they need to know is what they're passionate about. And as Kate mentioned in the early part of the webinar, and I never stop saying this, people need to know what matters most to them so that they can live by that. And then their career will fill around that. So when you're looking at what skills do I love, what do I love doing, what kind of workplace do I love being in, then finding the people that can take you through those transition gaps so that you can continue on that pathway, that's what we really need. And again, I'll talk about the messy ecosystem. Duplication is rife across our programs, and honestly, I don't think that's ever going to change. And that's why we need entities that are prepared, entities, humans, people who have a passionate belief, like I do, that people really deserve the solutions that are out there for them. To reduce the duplication simply by telling people what actually exists. Now, as I go into the next projects, I'll show you how we've done that. So we also learned that a digital solution alone won't work. So as much as I'd like to think that this amazing digital solution that we've created could be the bee's knees and the be all end all, it's not. We really need to change the way that we're thinking. And that's why we knew an actual campaign needed to be part of the youth employment work that we're doing too. I also realised that we need an overriding strategy. So it's one thing for 6 different task forces to be working on the same project. But we actually found that there were 3 career days for young people in the space of Grafton to Coffs Harbour within 2 weeks. Why would you do that? That defies logic to me. It is such a waste of resources and people's time. But with an overriding strategy that we can all agree to, we can actually share information so that we don't have to duplicate. Okay, so when I talk about the ecosystem, this is the way that I see it for young people. So young people may be involved in school life, maybe vocational education, uni, etc. So this is the education sector. Maybe involved or engaged in labour market programs. Could also be a combination of these. Maybe they're doing vet in school or something like that. And I think vet in school is the most incredible thing, particularly for kids that are a little bit disengaged in school. Great way for them to be getting through. Welfare and support services also being part of it, and of course work and employment. Now, when you think about the different sectors that are involved in this conversation, we've got industry sitting here, we've got government sitting in these areas, school and vet, we've got the NGO, not-for-profit sector, and community volunteers sitting here. And quite often they can approach these pathways for young people with very different philosophies. So while a welfare service may be very invested in making sure that a young person has a good life or troubleshoots homelessness or whatever it is that's impacting them, if they're not attached to what is the pathway, where do you want to go? Once we find you a home, do you want to work? Do you want to return to school? If their focus is only on a welfare-oriented approach, that is not going to help the broader ecosystem, and they'll miss all of these linkages that a young person could have. When a young person, and I speak about this because I worked directly with community services for 15 years, and I understand not all services work like this, but some do. if we're only looking at welfare and not the broader ecosystem, it's very hard for a young person to pivot through those transition points so they can go on to work or they can go on to study despite all of this stuff that's happened to them in the past. And similarly, if they're only looking at their education pathway, well, maybe there's a whole bunch of welfare services that they're needing to support and help them to become resilient so that they know where to go when they have challenges. So we need to work out a way. And when I spoke before about we need people that are the glue to glue this all together, we really need to have a conversation, and this is part of our broader campaign about how do people access information about these services? How do you tell people about what exists? How do you tell a family, look, these are 3 different options?
Kerry seems to have frozen there, but we'll just give her a quick moment to come back on online. But I've just got a couple of questions there that have come through in the chat, and I might just mention one of them, which is from Marie, and she talks about community centres involvement, and I'll ask Kerry to get back to that. But saying in their local community centre where she works, Marie works, they've run a Certificate 1 training in hospitality, and 9 of the 10 students achieved employment, and the other trainee went on for further studies. So congratulations, Marie, a great story.
So, Kate, I suppose we could have just a bit of a discussion about what Kerry's raised so far while we're waiting for her to come back. I thought it was interesting towards the end there, Kerry was mentioning about the siloed effect and the difficulty in just accessing information. That seems to be a common pattern amongst a lot of things.
I think it is. I think it's a big problem. There's so much information. Accessing the right information and getting information in the right format so that it's easily usable. I know my inbox is just filled with information day after day, and I'm sort through it. Here we are. It looks as though we have Kerry back.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Sorry, we're tethered to the iPhone now, so I'll leave my video off just for a minute, just in case that helps. Okay, so as I was just giving an example about my son, I asked the council if he could do work experience as a civil engineer, and they said, yes, of course, that would be fine. And the school was able to match that into, because the school didn't have engineering, he had to do that by distance. And then they eventually matched that with a vocational education qualification too. So I think people can be a little bit afraid to ask what it is that they need for, but you don't need to be, because that's where the gold is. That's what happens. Now, if you're advocating or advising for a child that isn't your own child or a parent, schools have really big rules, and they sometimes get upset with me for trying to stretch them a little bit and what can happen, but there's a lot more that can happen for young people to get them into work experience than we're often told. So ask questions. That's really important. If you're going to be the glue that's helping people into these systems, make sure that you're asking as many questions as you possibly can. Now, just go on to the next one. So what we ended up creating was a online platform that we did market test it as My Future Workforce. So this is live online. The URL is myfutureworkforce.com.au, and you can actually access this at the moment in the Mid-North Coast and the Northern Rivers. And because they're also in it's a really easy way for people, their skills, influence business decisions, etc. We designed it so it only takes about 6 minutes to register. But rather than like a seek.com or something like that, looking at the jobs that people are looking for or the jobs that they have, it actually registers the skills that they're looking for in their workplace or the skills that they have. So we've future-proofed it in that way. The other thing that the platform does that is a little bit unique is it links people back, identifies that they're homeless. The system will link them with 5 different services or however many exist that can actually support them in what they need. And similarly, if anybody applies for a job as a barista, but they may not have that certificate, the system will tell them where they can go to get that certificate. So all of that linking and introduction, and I spoke about glue a second ago, so all of that glue is what is important, and it's what this system actually does for people. So it's free for anybody to use. As I mentioned, at the moment it's only available in the North Coast, Northern Rivers and the island communities as well. But if you're interested in looking at it for your region, please just going to use it. And also we wanted to make it, for example, on it, because we want the job seeker to have equal access to any type of training program or any type of job service. It was never set up to replace anything that currently exists in the marketplace. It was just set up to bring this ecosystem and the various components closer together. So that's what it's for. Now, if you want to just have a bit of a poke around and have a look at what it looks like, you can go just into my future workforce and click on the Mid-North Coast and just have a bit of a look. It's all very, very simple to use. Now, behind it, if you look at the reporting, now we designed it to be a very, very powerful data platform. So as you can see, there's different reports that can into the system, can come back out of the system again. So when we look at job seekers, for example, you can see that this is the age range of people that are currently registered in the Mid-North Coast. Someone's decided to vacuum in the background. I'm really sorry if you can hear that. When you look at employers, you can see that we currently have 45 employers registered, 10 jobs are active, and then 17 blueprints have been submitted. Now, another used to be, or still currently are, will actually be redundant in the future. So in the future, resumes will use artificial intelligence. Resumes will be more dynamic. They'll be able to be more specific. For assistant on seek.com some time ago, I received 96 applications. 20 of them were relevant enough to read. 4 people had the skills that were worth interviewing for. Now that is a lot of effort and energy for a employer to go through. So itself. So next we'll look at the service providers. So we support. So I've just gone through the service provider one. Basic welfare services are registered, etc. Skills. And we look at skills in numerous ways, thinking future skills are things like initiative, active learning. We've also consulted with the World Economic Forum in the development and our understanding of these skills. We also look at skills in terms of employability skills. So they're your basic things like punctuality, etc., literacy, numeracy. And we've looked at skills in terms of their technical skills and then workplace relevant skills. So as you can see in time, we're going to have an enormous database of skill demand and skill supply across whatever region it is that's actually using this platform. Now, I do realise that there's some companies such as Burning Glass Technologies, which already look at skills, and they do some incredible work in this area. we know that where their information comes is through essentially job scraping. So they're getting information across many, many hundreds of websites across the world. And that's talking about what skills are employers looking for today. It's not necessarily talking about what skills do job seekers have, and it's not necessarily talking about what skills do employers look for tomorrow. And that's where we wanted to really fill that gap, which our program does, albeit in its early stages. Now, just a little bit on the North Coast Employment Strategy. So when Tim and I developed this strategy, we really wanted to have these 4 different components to be at its core. So the first is structure, and we wanted to build that structure so it can collaboratively drive workforce development through the North Coast. The way that it's structured is it uses a model that comes from Canada, which is the collaboration.
It's a central governance group, but it has a very light touch on the way that it governs what it is that it's working on. So our governance group includes representation from state government, Commonwealth government, job services, and also industry. And then from there, we have working parties that feed into it. So the working parties basically pitch concepts to the governance group. The governance group has that information from a helicopter view. So they basically know all the projects that are going on and what links, what connects, what opportunities might be coming up. The working party goes off and does its job, and then it may create a second project or it may disband at that point. And that's the way that it needs to be. So current structures that we have around employment are often very formal, very they can miss out on the stakeholders that are required. And again, I'll just reiterate that when we create holistic solutions for the regions, we really need things that look at industry, government, not-for-profits, and community. And unless we've got those 4 factors of representation, it's hard to create something that's holistic and sustainable over a long term. So our strategy looked at supply and demand. So it looked at how can we actually frame employment opportunities in a way that does engage job seekers? How can we not just keep doing the same old? I dug up some records from RDA years past the other day, and they're really similar programs to what are in the marketplace now. And, you know, I just thought maybe they were great programs and maybe they worked well, or maybe we just keep recycling things and wonder why things don't change. And for me, when I see people hitchhiking to job services, and when I see 4th generational unemployment, and when I see, you know, I live in these communities, and I know a lot of the listeners do too, that's the thing that makes me think we've got to stop doing the same old thing, and we've got to start doing things in a new way. And we
Kerry, we're just having a little bit of trouble with your sound at the moment. I'm not sure if you can hear me, if you can signal if you can hear me. No, we've just lost Kerry for a little minute, but we'll allow her time to come back in. We've got a couple of comments here, and just going back to the region that the Community Development Centre was working in. I've just gone back to Marie to ask her where that region actually is, because that would always be helpful. And the other question, which I'll put to Kerry when she comes back on, is what does the local role does the local chamber of commerce play, and does the chamber do the skills audit? So I put that question out to other people as well. I'm really looking forward to SEGRA next year, when we can actually have conversations with each other. So Marie, thank you for getting back to me. Marie works in the Western Downs region in Queensland, and of those 10 people that did certificates, 9 of which got jobs and 1 of which went on to further study, they were all long-term unemployed. So That's a very encouraging story, Marie, and perhaps we can get you on a webinar to talk about what that work was. But if people have got some comments on the role that their local Chamber of Commerce plays, I'd be interested to hear that. I certainly resonated with Kerry in terms of approaching people about work experience as well. As a parent, I've been quite surprised at how much initiative our family had to show in terms of work experience, despite being located in southeast Queensland and at a relatively big school. It certainly mirrored her experience of schools finding it hard to make those links with businesses. And I'm involved in a college at the University of Queensland on their council, and we're just experimenting at the moment with trying to link past graduates from the college to current students to encourage that mentoring. So a couple of opportunities or ideas immediately come to mind in that space.
Kate, I'm back in again. I'm not even going to break the screen or the video this time. I do apologise, everyone. And look, I only had one more slide anyway, which was just when you promoted this webinar, I was contacted by the Bendigo Bank, and they've partnered with the Salvation Army to create a program that I really think it needs mentioning, because a lot of listeners will be in bushfire impacted communities, and they've set up a scholarship for young people to assist them with their pathways. So if they can apply, just Google Salvation Army Youth Pathways Program, and if you can't find it, drop me an email and I'll send you a link to it. So it appears to be a really great program just to help young people to continue on their pathways, even if they have been impacted by those bushfires. That's it though. For me, the main take homes are, if you want to check out My Future Workforce, please do. It's available online. Be the glue, be the person that connects all of the different facets. And when you're sitting around a table planning, whether it's around youth unemployment or anything really, ask yourself, are those 4 different sectors actually represented at the table, to make sure you've got that holistic view so that people aren't getting left behind in our regions. And I mean, with COVID, we're at a really critical tipping point where we need to think differently. We need to do things differently. We need to do them collaboratively as well.
Thanks very much, Kerry. That's been a very, very interesting presentation, and I'm just sorry we're not you're not speaking at a SEGRA where we could actually talk to you and talk to each other, because we've had a very interesting question come up, which is the role. Is there a role for the local Chamber of Commerce? Would they be people who would have some knowledge for a skills audit? I just wondered if your local chamber had been involved, or what the situation or your experience has been.
We work closely with Callan Beard, who's in Business New South Wales, and I actually sit on their community representative group as well, so that Callan works across our whole region. But when it comes to individual chambers, I'm not sure how many are in my region, probably 15 I would think. And we had a pathways officer who went and spoke at a lot of those chamber meetings. And I actually think that you know, as chambers are rethinking their relevance into the future as well, look, the more that you can connect with your community, you're connecting with your future employees, you're connecting with your future customers. Why can't chambers have speed dating, for want of a better metaphor, with potential job seekers? Why can't job seekers be invited into the room to learn about your industries and your businesses? I actually think the chambers play a critical role, and if thought through creatively and, you know, really analytically with those 4 sectors again in mind, the chambers would play an absolutely essential role in job development and business development.
Thank you, Kerry. And that's certainly something. I'm chair of the Home-Based Business Council of Australia, and your initial slide about the large number of employ companies or businesses in regional Australia where there's just one person or a couple, I think is something that we need to hone in on more. And I'm looking forward to working with the Home-Based Business Council to do that. We've just got a comment here from Jerry, which I'm trying to scan as we go, but Jerry has come through saying that they have just facilitated an RDV youth-led research report on how work works. This backs up the complexity of the ecosystem for young people, where industry in the Loddon Campaspe say they have jobs, but young people don't know what the job is and how to get it, so they're not on the same page. And Jerry has provided a URL link. I'll read it out for those who want it now. http://www.nCLLEN.org.au/youth-internships HTML, and we'll try and get that out. People should be able to read that on the chat, but we'll try and get that out to everyone who's on it. I'll put it in the Q&A now if I can, so that people can get it from there. So that sounds fabulous, and I think that's Victoria, Jerry, and certainly worth looking that up. So thanks for that.
Hey, can I add in at that point as well? I think because of COVID, we're seeing a lot of industries like agriculture, for example, and hospitality as well, where they may have had different employment or recruitment strategies in the past, which aren't working now because obviously, you know, the people can't get here. Those industries are really starting to see the importance of nurturing their local job markets where they may never have done that before. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that they have to bring somebody in as a blueberry picker, for example. Maybe they could be looking at broader programs to make that a more attractive option and again, link it into a pathway. So even blueberry picking within itself still has those basic employability skills. It still requires some level of logistical skills, planning. If paired with a course that can drag out all of those things, it can actually set people up at the start of their pathway and meet those labour market shortages.
Great, thanks very much. We've got a couple of minutes if other people have some questions that they'd like to ask of Kerry, or information that they'd like to share with the group. Very interested to hear about Bendigo Bank pairing up with the Salvation Army. Do you know if that's a localised service or how that?
It's wherever the bushfires, I will be brave and share this slide so that people can see it. Wherever communities were impacted by bushfires, it's available. So it's a national campaign, and I believe they've processed about 200 applications so far. And they're things like school fees, maybe computers, TAFE fees, etc., things like that. This feels very brave to share it again. Hopefully the internet's going to work. So they're called Education and Workplace Pathways Grants.
Great, thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's a really good program, good opportunity.
Great, Robert.
Kerry, yeah, I was just really interested in those stats about, as Kate said, and you said, you know, 60% of businesses are basically don't employ anyone, and really youth employment is about 0.01%. And with such a high level of youth unemployment in regions, does that really mean that a lot of youth, if they don't leave for jobs elsewhere, really are going to be generationally unemployed? Because it just doesn't seem to stack up that there would ever be enough employment opportunities for youth with those figures for business to employ them.
It's interesting, isn't it, Robert? And I think there's a big conversation to be had with regions like ours, such as the Mid-North Coast, where there aren't enough jobs for people, and regions such as, of course, the Riverina and Arana, where there aren't enough people for the jobs. And how do we transition that? Why do we need to own people? Why do we need to say we need the young people to stay here? Why can't we bring them back? later down the track. I think that it's a very provocative and sometimes politically driven conversation as well, but I think it's one that we need to have as a nation, and start to think about maybe relocation incentives so that we can fill those skill gaps where they exist and get young people an opportunity so they don't become entrenched in unemployment and have the opportunities. Yeah, but I mean, similarly with those businesses, 60% employ nobody. That is an industry within itself. There are linking opportunities there. Why don't we have those businesses sharing front of house services and creating new jobs in doing that? Why don't we have them collaboratively employing bookkeepers or marketers, or, you know, young people are excellent Instagrammers. They know social media inside out. There's a whole industry waiting to happen there.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the sort of casual employment pathway for, because a lot of young people, when they're going through high school, do sort of enter the workforce through a bit of casual employment, whether it's hospitality or baristering. Is that still a significant pathway in a way for them into the workforce?
Well, look, that's been the pathway for my children, and I've seen them form those employability skills that have been really critical for their future careers. I do think it's important, but when we're looking at people that are really highly disadvantaged and may not have a car to get to the local, you know, fast food chain, how does that happen? And when I say we need to get creative, we need to get creative in carpooling services, for example, or, you know, transport is never going to be able to afford to go to everybody's doorstep. It's just not in regional Australia. We've got a big country, but there are other ways, and we need to get clever about them to be able to do it. I know community transport in my area ran a L driver program at one stage where, you know, the community transport driver might drive somebody to their appointment, but while they're waiting for the appointment, they could pick up some L plate hours with a young person. Now, somehow somebody made insurance work to do that. And they're the types of really, you know, broad, smart thinking that we need to create change, because otherwise we're just going to keep going around the same old pathways.
And also, have you picked up any feelings about, I suppose, the youth's perspective of the future? You know, particularly with COVID impact, everything happening, these young people are entering a world of uncertainty that we probably can't even imagine when we were young. Is there a state of mind that's a bit different for young people today?
Is there a state of mind that's a bit different for young people? Yeah, look, I think they have different expectations of life than certainly I had when I was growing up. But I mean, I think about, I grew up in Maxwell in New South Wales, and it was an expectation that I would leave, because I wouldn't, you know, I had to leave to go to university. I had to leave to go to college. I had to leave to find my career. I don't have to leave now. But that also brings up a whole different range of, you know, opportunities and considerations for them. There's a, you know, enormous amount of studies about the differences between millennials and, you know, our cynical Generation X's and baby boomers, etc. That, you know, you hear people saying that kids want to start at the top instead. It is true with some millennials, but I've met plenty of kids that are really happy to learn and learn the basics so that they can move forward. But maybe there's a hint in that we need more employability programs for young people to teach them the soft skills, and maybe they need to start in kindergarten instead of year 9 when it might be too late.
Yes, I really liked your list of those soft skills of initiative and creative thinking that you put up earlier. Kerry, listen, we're running out of time rapidly, and I'm conscious of the internet. I do want to wind up before you drop out again. So can I thank you very, very much for that very comprehensive overview of what you've been doing in Mid-North Coast. Really interesting to hear that complete package, as it were, rather than just a single project. And can I commend you on the establishment of a governance group with working parties underneath. I've been doing some work on social capital governance and place-based development, and certainly looking at the examples around regional Australia. That's a model that seems to have worked on 2 or 3 occasions very successfully. So congratulations on cracking that nut, because that can be a very difficult nut to nut to crack. So thank you very, very much for the time and effort you've put into sharing that with us today. And I've had a couple of comments come through saying thank you very much for your presentation. Next Wednesday, we'll be hearing from Peter Kenyon, who's also into community development and social capital, and people might know him from his newsletter, The Bank of Ideas. So thank you very much, Kerry, again for your participation. Thank you, Robert, and we look forward to talking again next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much.